Hi, my name is Allison, and I will be talking to y'all about these witch trials of Salem. The Salem witch trials began in Massachusetts in 1692 and 1693. There was a social divide between the leading families of the community of Salem, and there were also split factions between the families and the community of Salem because they have a new pastor by the name of Samuel Paris coming in. In January of 1962, two young girls by the name of Elizabeth and Abigail started throwing fits, including violent contortions and uncontrollable outbursts like screaming and just being unable to control themselves, really. And because that the community didn't know what was going on with these girls, they called the local doctor in to check them out. And the local doctor had decided that they had been bewitched. And because these girls had been bewitched, this is why that they were having their outbursts and loud screaming and violent contortions and just everything. Because the doctor said this, the other girls in the town got word and started doing these violent contusions and uncontrollable outbursts and everything like that. And then the doctor diagnosed them as being bewitched as well. But they didn't know where or how these women were bewitched. So then they started asking questions on like why that they are bewitched and how they are bewitched. So then they had to find somebody to blame, basically. And then about a month after all of that's going on with all the young girls saying and being diagnosed as bewitched, the town sends out arrest warrants for a lady who was a slave from the Caribbean for the Paris family by the name of Tituba, and two other women by Sarah Good, who was a homeless lady in the town, and Sarah Osborne, who was an elderly lady in the town. These women were accused and served with arrest warrants for bewitching these young women, and they were brought before Jonathan Corwin and Jonathan Hawthorne to be questioned and put on trial for bewitching these young women. As the trial is going on, the girls who are accusing these women of bewitching them are in the trial stands doing their violent contusions and uncontrollable screaming outbursts and acting like they're being bewitched all over again. And while the trial is going on, Osborne and Good maintain their innocence the whole time, saying they were never witches, they never bewitched anyone, and they never did anything like that. But Tituba confessed to being a witch doing the devil's work, and that she had other witches working with her, and that they were there all to basically damn the Puritans. Because of this trial, hysteria spread throughout the community after her confession, and many other women were accused of bewitching or being witches. The newly appointed Governor William Phipps ordered an establishment of a special court of oyer and terminer to hear and decide on witchcraft cases for 3 different counties. He appointed judges Hawthorne, Samuel Sewall, and William Sutton. These judges were the ones who took all of the witches' trials and put the witches on trial to determine if they were actually practicing witchcraft or bewitched or anything to do with witches and doing the devil's work. The first conviction of witchcraft was in June of 1692 against Bridget Bishop. She was hanged 8 days later on a hill called Gallows Hill in the town of Salem. Following this, there were many other trials, including enough trials for 5 women to be hanged in the month of July, and then 5 more women in the month of August. And while all these women are going to trial and being hanged, there were also 7 women in jail that were accused of being witches that had died in jail. And there was also a man that was jailed for being accused of being a witch's husband by the name of Giles Corey, and he was pressed to death by stones because he refused to enter a plea deal. So these 3 men were prosecuting these young women, and once they were prosecuted, they were hanged after they were found that they were witches. While the witch trials were going on, respected minister Cotton Mather had warned people about the dubious value of spectral evidence. His concerns were largely ignored. He believed that there was no witchcraft, that everybody was making this up, and it wasn't real, and we were killing innocent people, even though this witchcraft stuff wasn't real. Cotton's father, who was a professor at the University of Harvard, joined his son in urging the standards of evidence for witchcraft and the fact that they need to be equal to those of other crimes. They needed to have solid evidence, because you could just be convicting an innocent person. I just want you to be confident in what you're saying and confident in the evidence that is going out there. Cotton also once stated, it would be better that 10 suspected witches may escape than 1 innocent person to be condemned. After Mathers received public support for waning the trials, Governor Phipps dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer in October of 1692 and mandated to disregard spectral evidence. In May of 1692, William Phipps had pardoned and released all of those in prison for witchcraft. After all these pardonings go on, they realized that what they're doing was wrong, and that they didn't have sufficient evidence to be convicting these people of practicing witchcraft, and just realized that they need more evidence than spectral evidence. So they dissolved the whole special unit, basically. And then years later, in 1697, which is about 5 years later, the General Court of Massachusetts declared a day of fasting for the Salem witch trials tragedy, and they also deemed the trials unlawful, as in they were not right, because there wasn't sufficient evidence for everything. And in addition to all those things, Samuel Sewall, who was one of the judges persecuting these women, publicly apologized for his role in the trials. And I've got all this information works cited right here. History.com had really great stuff. And then the Smithsonian also had some really great information on the history of the Salem witch trials and the wrongdoing that happened to all those women and men.